I faked my financial collapse, pretended to be sick and desperate to execute the final, cruelest loyalty test on my own children. For over half a year, I listened to them dream about my death, and only one of my children ever showed up to hand me a glass of water. Now, it is time to read the will. I am Thomas, a 70-year-old widower who built a fortune from the ground up, owning a chain of successful auto dealerships. I retired opulent, a mansion, a yacht, and my true passion, a meticulously restored 1968 Ford Mustang. But after my wife Martha died, my life became a gilded cage. My two children, Nick and Sarah, didn't see me. They saw assets. Nick, the failed real estate agent, was a constant financial drain, always needing a, quote, zero. Sarah, while more capable, had grown accustomed to my bailouts. Their every visit felt less like affection and more like an audit of my health, constantly fishing for details about the will. If you are compelled by stories of ultimate consequence and moral betrayal, take a second to subscribe. You don't want to miss the shocking moments this test reveals. The cancer of suspicion metastasized 3 months ago, during a simple flu. Nick flew in for an hour, sat by my bedside, and instead of asking if I needed anything, he asked if the safe combination had changed. He actually joked about the, quote, Sarah, however, stayed 3 days, silently bringing soup and managing my affairs. That moment crystallized my reality. I was surrounded by vultures, waiting for the old lion to drop. I realized the only way to find my true heir, the one with genuine loyalty, was to stage my own financial death. The money was meaningless. The truth was everything. My inheritance would become the ultimate reflection of their character. The first step, selling the Mustang, was about to signal the beginning of the end. The moment Nick asked about the safe, the father in me died, and the judge took over. My new job was meticulously crafting my financial, quote, it had to be a total, irreversible collapse, dramatic enough to scare off the gold diggers, yet legally airtight to protect my real fortune. I enlisted Mr. Henderson, my most discreet attorney, the only person who knew the truth. I paid him a massive retainer for his silence. The plan had 2 critical phases. First, we fabricated a disastrous paper trail, hundreds of pages detailing catastrophic losses in, quote, a common, messy way for the rich to vanish their wealth. Second, and most crucial, all my true assets, the mansion, the yacht, and my core wealth, were stealthily transferred into the Thomas Family Anonymous Trust. Legally, I became a debtor with 0 recoverable wealth. The most painful part was selling my 1968 Mustang. That car was the physical symbol of my success, my passion, and their anticipation. Its sale was the perfect, undeniable signal of desperation. Nick and Sarah both knew I'd never willingly part with it. I listed it privately, not to pay debts, but purely for the theatrics of the announcement. The enormous sum from the sale immediately joined the anonymous trust. Finally, the new home. I couldn't stay in the mansion. Henderson leased a cramped, forgettable 2-bedroom apartment, far from my old neighborhood. I staged the move slowly, ensuring both children witnessed the movers taking my lifelong possessions to a supposed liquidation sale. I wanted them to see the dismantling of their imagined inheritance, piece by piece. My emotional justification for this brutal act was simple. I deserved honest love. If this test didn't bring loyalty, it would bring the truth, and that truth would be worth millions. The final assembly was at the mansion. I had called Nick and Sarah for a quote 5, but their crisp suits and expectant smiles showed they hoped for an early inheritance announcement. I let them sit in tense silence for 20 minutes, observing them, 2 eager vultures ready to feast. I needed that moment of false hope to maximize the contrast with the devastating news. When I finally spoke, my voice was strained, a masterpiece of false despair. I slid the fabricated report detailing the quote 7 collapse across the mahogany table. It was a masterpiece of forgery, columns of glaring red figures that screamed total ruin. The silence that followed wasn't grief. It was the chilling vacuum created by the sudden withdrawal of a massive, lifelong expectation. Nick's face, usually masked by false charm, turned instantly skeletal with rage. His first words weren't, quote, but a furious, guttural hiss, quote. He didn't see his father. He saw a wrecked portfolio. He was mourning the loss of property, not the loss of his dad. Sarah's reaction was more complex. She sprang up, genuine panic in her eyes. "Dad, where are you going to live? What about the house?" Her concern felt momentarily real, but it quickly curled into self-interest. "Please tell me the large loan for my shop expansion is safe. Am I personally bankrupt now, too?" That single, self-preserving question was the evidence I needed. I finished the performance. The house is entering foreclosure. Every account is compromised. I'm moving to a small, temporary rental tomorrow. I am completely, utterly bankrupt. I watched them absorb the finality. The facade of familial love shattered, replaced by the cold, calculating ambition of two people who now saw me only as a burdensome liability. The test was working perfectly. I just needed to document their coming distance. The move was deliberately staged. I used a small, battered rental truck, making sure it was visible to anyone who cared to look. I wanted the news of my fall to spread like wildfire. My new residence was a cramped, two-bedroom apartment in a forgettable part of town. The furniture was cheap, the walls were thin, and the view was a concrete alley, a stark, miserable contrast to the mansion. Every moment of discomfort was a necessary commitment to my disguise. The second I settled in, I installed the surveillance equipment. This was the core of my plan, irrefutable proof. Miniature, high-definition cameras were hidden inside clocks and smoke detectors, capturing every glance, every sneer, and every whisper. I also set up a sophisticated call recording system on my burner phone. I wasn't collecting anecdotes. I was gathering evidence for a recorded confession of their greed. Nick's first visit was 2 days later. He didn't come to help. He came to scavenge. He stood at the threshold, openly repulsed by the worn carpet and the smell of cheap takeout. He refused to sit. "Dad, this is disgusting," he hissed, his face a mask of shame and fury. "This is embarrassing. The family name is ruined." He spent 20 minutes interrogating me about hidden assets. "Are you sure the antique watch collection wasn't protected? Did you manage to hide the gold cufflinks?" When he realized there was absolutely nothing left to take, he bolted, mumbling about a critical business meeting. The sheer relief on his face as he escaped confirmed I was merely a liability he desperately wanted to jettison. Sarah showed up the next morning with groceries and a small potted plant. She avoided criticizing the apartment, focusing on practical help. She helped unpack the few remaining boxes, filled with old photos. Yet her kindness wasn't unconditional. As she tidied the small kitchenette, she brought up Mr. Henderson. Her subtle shift from to was logged. Her loyalty was conditional, linked to protecting her own economic stability. The subtle shift from guarded concern to outright hostility was rapid once the weekly checks stopped. This was the moment I cut the financial leash entirely, forcing my children to stand on their own, or stumble dramatically. For years, I had quietly covered Nick's exorbitant credit card bills and paid off the residual mortgage on his oversized, underperforming condo. I had also guaranteed Sarah's loan for her floral shop expansion. Now, all those automatic payments ceased. The reaction was immediate and explosive, specifically from Nick. The first call came exactly 1 week after a payment was missed. I recorded the entire exchange.
He didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Dad, what the hell is going on? My bank just hit me with a massive late fee on the condo. You promised to cover that until my next deal closes." When I reminded him that I was now, quote, 19, and had no access to funds, he switched instantly to manipulative anger. "You always find a way. You're just being spiteful now. You could easily sell some of your wife's jewelry or those worthless gold coins you kept. You'd rather see your own son lose his home than part with sentimental garbage." His voice was full of venom, truly believing I was deliberately orchestrating his ruin out of petty vengeance. It was devastating to hear, but invaluable evidence. Sarah's response, as usual, was quieter but equally revealing. She called me from the office of her loan officer. She wasn't angry. She was panicked and terrified. "Dad, they called in the guarantee. They need a new cosigner immediately. I don't have the cash flow to cover this. I might lose the shop. Could you just call Mr. Henderson and explain that you'll cover the interest for a few months until I find a new backer?" She was fighting for her business, her passion, and her future. But she still expected me to appear like a phantom savior. When I gently told her, "I'm sorry, sweetie, I really can't help you with this anymore. I barely have enough for my own rent," her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper of defeat. She didn't lash out. She just said, she hung up, not in a huff, but in a quiet resignation that somehow hurt more than Nick's shouting. Nick, on the other hand, escalated his tactics. He started sending texts filled with emotional blackmail, calling me and suggesting I was trying to. I archived every message. This phase of the test was brutal. Cutting the money felt like ripping off a limb, and the raw, selfish reactions that followed confirmed the depths of their entitlement. I realized that for Nick, I wasn't his father. I was a broken ATM machine, and he was furious that it was finally out of service. Cutting the money only exposed their greed. Now I needed to expose their basic humanity, or lack thereof. It was time for the sickness scam. I knew from my earlier flu that a simple request for physical help, not financial, would be the most difficult thing for the greedy heart to grant. I started calling both of them with a carefully crafted, weak voice. The message I left for Nick was urgent but vague. "I'm running a high fever, son. I need to get to the pharmacy for medication, and I can barely stand up. Can you possibly drive me, or at least pick up the prescription? It's just 5 minutes out of your way." I called him 3 times that afternoon. Nick's return call was recorded, as always. His voice was cold, impatient, and utterly dismissive. "Dad, I can't. I have 3 showings today, and you know how demanding my clients are. If I miss a showing, I lose the commission. And I'm already trying to prevent the condo foreclosure because of your, situation. Call an Uber, or better yet, call Sarah. She's only got flowers to deal with, right?" He clearly viewed my physical distress as a massive inconvenience and a distraction from his own self-inflicted financial drama. The cold, calculated cruelty of his response, telling a sick, penniless father to call an Uber, was a profound piece of evidence. He prioritized a potential commission over my supposed health crisis. I repeated the same plea to him 3 days later, asking for help with groceries because my fever was worsening. His text reply was even more brutal. "Use Instacart, Dad. It's what broke people do. Stop making yourself a problem. I'm busy trying to save my life, not yours." The phrase, "stop making yourself a problem," cut deeper than any financial betrayal. It confirmed that in his mind, I was just an obstacle, a hurdle to his imagined wealth. Sarah's reaction was, again, the counterpoint. She was dealing with her own financial turmoil, desperately trying to refinance her shop loan. Yet she drove across town twice that week. She brought soup, picked up the prescription, and even cleaned my tiny, depressing bathroom without being asked. She never complained about the trip or her own stress. However, as she left after the second visit, she carefully said, her comment wasn't cruel, it was practical, a subtle worry that my poverty might make me a long-term burden. While she physically showed up, the underlying thought was about managing my dependence on her. The test was agonizing, but the data was conclusive. Nick was an abyss of self-interest. Sarah was loyal, but cautiously so, still hedging her bets against total sacrifice.
I had all the evidence I needed to proceed to the climax. The 6 months of isolation were the hardest period of my life, even harder than building my empire from scratch. The sheer emotional cruelty I witnessed from Nick was a profound, agonizing confirmation of my worst fears. He stopped calling entirely after I refused his grocery plea. His text, "Stop making yourself a problem," echoed in the quiet, depressing apartment every night. The silence from him was not peaceful. It was a screaming void of complete abandonment. I was supposedly a bankrupt, sick old man, and his response was to surgically remove me from his life as a necessary burden reduction. The pain was real, but it was fuel. Every piece of his recorded callousness became another zero added to Sarah's future inheritance. Sarah, despite her own escalating financial problems with the shop loan, became my quiet, dependable shadow. She would call every few days, not to ask for money, but simply to check on my temperature or bring a homemade meal. She never asked to see the financial documents, never pressed me about the will, and never once blamed me for her current difficulties. She fought fiercely for her business, pulling extra shifts and finding a new, less supportive co-signer, all while ensuring I had clean laundry and a hot meal. Her visits became my only anchors to sanity. She didn't see me as an ATM. She saw me as her struggling father. However, during this agonizing period, the secret work with Mr. Henderson, my trusted attorney, was reaching its climax. We weren't just protecting the money. We were defining the precise terms of the anonymous trust and drafting the final, legally ironclad documents for the reveal. Every single asset, the yacht, the main estate, the millions in index funds, was now locked away. The trust was designed to be instantly dissolvable by me, but only under specific terms that would ensure the final distribution could never be contested by the disinherited party. Henderson traveled to the tiny apartment twice, meeting me under the cover of darkness to finalize the paperwork. We sat in the cramped living room, surrounded by my disguise of poverty, signing documents that controlled fortunes. It felt like a scene from a spy movie, except the stakes were not national secrets, but the emotional integrity of my family. I added clauses about Nick's 10% share. He wouldn't get a penny of the interest until he completed 2 years of volunteer work at a specific charity that deals with elderly neglect. It wasn't about the money. It was a mandatory lesson in humility and basic human empathy. The stage was set. The trap was sprung. All that remained was the final gathering for the grand confrontation. 6 months to the day after I announced my bankruptcy, I called Nick and Sarah for a final meeting. I insisted on holding it at Mr. Henderson's pristine, high-rise office, a setting deliberately chosen to inject a false sense of official finality into the situation. Nick was the first to arrive, already wearing a forced mask of solemn respect. He assumed this was a last-ditch effort by the father to divide what little was left, perhaps a few pieces of jewelry. Sarah walked in quietly, her shoulders slumped from her own financial battles, yet she managed a tired but sincere smile for me. I sat them down opposite a large, high-definition monitor. Mr. Henderson sat stiffly beside me, the silent witness. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. My voice, now clear, strong, and entirely free of the weakness I'd simulated for months, cut through the tension. I've gathered you here to finalize my will. Before we get to the legal documents, however, I have one final piece of evidence to present.
This evidence will explain the reasoning behind my final wishes. Nick shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between me and Henderson. Sarah just looked confused. I nodded to the attorney, who pressed a button, and the office speakers came to life. The first clip was a recording of Nick's angry phone call from months ago, his voice saturated with entitlement. "You could easily sell some of your wife's jewelry. You'd rather see your own son lose his home than part with sentimental garbage." Nick's face flushed a deep, terrifying red. He started to protest. "Dad, that's not fair. I was under stress." But I cut him off. The second clip started immediately, a snippet of Nick talking to his friend, secretly recorded during his scavenging visit to the apartment. His voice was a cold, cynical drawl. "He's making himself a problem. Just a senile old fool who blew the fortune. I just wish the old man would hurry up and stop being such a liability." The sound of his voice filled the room, cold, damning, and absolutely irrefutable. Nick jumped to his feet, shouting, "You bugged me? You recorded me? This is illegal. You're insane." He looked ready to physically overturn the table. Sarah sat utterly still, her hands clasped, tears silently rolling down her face. Not tears of guilt, but tears of horror and shame for her brother. I let the scene play out for a minute of agonizing silence, allowing the sheer weight of his betrayal to crush the room. Then I stood up, taller and stronger than I had been in years. I looked Nick straight in his eyes, his mask of fake sincerity completely gone. "I never lost the fortune, Nick. I never was bankrupt. It was a test, a final, cruel test of loyalty, and you failed it in the most spectacular, callous way imaginable." The physical shock registered on Nick's face first. Disbelief morphed into calculating fury as he realized the money was still there. He instantly tried to revert to his old persona. "Dad, please. I was just kidding. It was stress talking. You have to understand. I love you." I raised a hand, stopping his pathetic plea. "No, I don't have to understand anything." The man who tells his bankrupt, sick father to stop making himself a problem does not deserve a penny of the legacy my wife and I built. You proved what you are. Now, Mr. Henderson, please read the final terms of the Thomas Family Anonymous Trust. The revenge was complete. The final judgment was about to be delivered. Mr. Henderson, with the composure of a seasoned professional, began to read the final terms of the Thomas Family Anonymous Trust. Nick was still breathing heavily, cycling between disbelief and calculated horror. Sarah was just silently crying, her relief for my safety mixing with profound sadness over the preceding 6 months. The Thomas Family Anonymous Trust holds 100% of Mr. Thomas's liquid assets, real estate holdings, and business proceeds. The total value remains exactly as it was 6 months ago, multiples of $10 million. Henderson paused, letting the figure sink into Nick's shocked mind. He continued, "The terms of the dissolution are as follows. 90% of the entire trust, including the mansion and the yacht, is hereby transferred directly and immediately to Sarah, effective today." Nick erupted. 90%? This is a joke. She doesn't need that much. It's illegal. I'll sue. I'm your son. You can't do this to me. He lunged forward, but Mr. Henderson's security escort, who I had wisely placed near the door, moved quickly to block him.
I waited until Nick was restrained, then addressed him calmly. The look on his face, a mixture of outrage, shame, and defeated greed, was the most satisfying piece of justice I had ever orchestrated. He didn't try to appeal to me as a father again. He just spat a curse and stormed out, slamming the office door behind him. He knew he had been judged and found fundamentally wanting. When the door closed, I turned to Sarah. She was crying freely now, hugging me tight. "Dad, I can't believe this. I'm so sorry you had to go through that just to find out who we were." I held her close. "I'm not sorry, sweetheart. I found my true heir, the one who deserves not just the money, but the peace of mind that comes with it. You passed the final test, not because you were perfect, but because when I was poor and sick, you showed up." With the legal drama over, a profound sense of peace washed over me. I wasn't just wealthy again. I was free. Free from the expectations, free from the manipulation, and free to enjoy my life and my fortune with the one person who truly cared. I bought a new, faster Corvette, a 2024 model this time, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a symbol of my freedom. Sarah and I now run a charitable foundation focused on supporting entrepreneurs who value integrity over quick profit. I live happily, watching Sarah thrive, realizing that true wealth is the legacy you leave in someone's heart, not their bank account. This was my revenge, my final judgment. The end. Thank you for listening. Now tell me, was my test too cruel, or was this the only way to find the truth? If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this true story compelling, please hit the like button and subscribe right now so you don't miss our next shocking revenge story.